An old German shepherd stood beneath the shelter lights, his muzzle silver with age, his hearing almost gone, his back legs stiff beneath him. He had already walked toward 3 different families that day. Each time the answer was no. Then someone finally said yes, only to bring him back before he ever made it home. By closing time, Charlie had stopped approaching anyone at all. But across Norfolk, a 38-year-old Navy SEAL had just seen his story. Why would Ryan Mitchell drive across the city for a dog he had never met? And when he finally sat down and held out his hand, would Charlie still be willing to trust one more person? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Saturday afternoon settled gently over Norfolk, Virginia, beneath a washed-out autumn sky. A light rain had passed through before noon, leaving the sidewalks dark and glossy and carrying the smell of wet leaves through the streets surrounding Harbor Haven Animal Shelter. Inside the shelter's multi-purpose room, folding chairs stood in loose rows beneath warm fluorescent lights. Volunteers refreshed water bowls, families moved between dogs with clipboards in hand, and every few minutes the front doors opened for another animal leaving with a new leash and a new family. For most of the dogs, the room seemed full of possibility. For Charlie, it was the 5th time he had been asked to stand in a room like this and somehow prove that being old did not make him less worth taking home. Charlie was an 11-year-old male German shepherd, large-framed despite the muscle age had slowly taken from his hips. His coat was black and tan, though the tan had faded into softer brown along his legs, and silver-gray fur covered most of his muzzle and spread beneath his tired, dark eyes. Arthritis had stiffened both rear legs, giving him a slow, careful walk. Nearly all his hearing was gone. When a metal bowl clattered across the floor and sent 2 younger dogs barking, Charlie never turned his head. He simply watched the people moving in front of him, relying on sight, scent, and vibration to understand a world that had gradually gone quiet. Charlie was not aggressive, and he was not especially timid. He simply disliked being surprised. A hand appearing from behind could make his entire body tense, while the same hand offered where he could see it might earn a cautious sniff. Rachel Morgan had learned every one of those details. At 55, Rachel was a compact woman with lightly lined olive skin, shoulder-length dark hair heavily streaked with silver, and sharp hazel eyes that seemed capable of noticing a trembling paw from across a crowded room. She had worked in animal rescue for 17 years. The job had made her compassionate without making her naive. Rachel no longer believed every sad story needed a villain or that every adoption should happen simply because someone felt sorry for an animal. She had seen loving people discover they could not afford surgery, elderly owners lose the strength to lift the animals they adored, and well-meaning adopters promise more than their homes or bodies could provide. Reality could be unkind without anyone deliberately choosing cruelty. Even so, Charlie had begun to worry her. 4 previous adoption events had ended the same way. The younger dogs disappeared one by one through the front doors, while Charlie eventually returned to the kennel wing beside Rachel. He never fought the leash. He never refused to go back. Sometimes Rachel thought resistance would have been easier to watch. For this event, Harbor Haven was trying a different method with several calm dogs. Instead of families immediately pointing toward the animal they wanted, Rachel allowed the dogs to move through a controlled meeting area and approach people first. The idea was simple. Let the animal have some choice too. Charlie surprised her by standing. The first person he approached was Helen Parker, a woman in her late 60s with a narrow frame, cropped white hair, pink-framed glasses, and a lavender cardigan buttoned neatly at the throat. Helen had been widowed 2 years earlier and had the soft, deliberate manner of someone who had learned not to fill every silence simply because it existed. Charlie stopped beside her chair and lowered his silver muzzle near her knee. Helen smiled immediately. "Well, hello, handsome." Charlie could not hear her, but he saw her expression. When Helen placed one hand slowly between his ears, Charlie allowed his eyelids to fall halfway closed. Rachel came over and explained everything. Charlie was 11, His hearing was almost completely gone. His arthritis required daily medication, and his mobility would probably worsen with time. Helen continued stroking his head until Rachel mentioned his weight. 75 pounds. Helen's hand stopped. She had undergone hip surgery 6 months earlier. Her house had 3 porch steps and she lived alone. "What happens if you can't get up one morning?" Helen asked. Rachel did not soften the answer. "You may need help." Helen looked at Charlie for a long time. Her face tightened with the particular sadness of someone who wanted something and already knew wanting would not make it practical. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Charlie did not hear the apology. He only felt the hand leave his head. He stood there another moment before slowly walking away. His second choice was Thomas and Julie Reed, a married couple in their early 50s. Thomas was broad through the chest, balding across the crown, with an easy smile and the booming laugh Charlie never noticed. Julie was petite, auburn-haired, and more cautious, the kind of woman who read the fine print before allowing hope to get too far ahead of reality. They had lost a Labrador the previous spring. Charlie settled beside Thomas's leg. Thomas scratched his chest and grinned. "I think I've been selected." For several minutes it seemed promising. Then Julie began asking questions. How much were Charlie's medications each month? What would diagnostic imaging cost if his hips worsened? Was dental work common at his age? Could he eventually need a mobility harness? Rachel answered each question honestly. Thomas's smile gradually faded into concentration. Julie folded the medical sheet once, then unfolded it again. They stepped aside to talk. Rachel watched Charlie watch them. Eventually, Julie returned with wet eyes. "He's wonderful," she said. "But I don't think we can responsibly promise this." Rachel nodded. That was the right sentence. It still ended with Charlie staying behind. The third time Charlie rose, he did so more slowly. He took several steps toward a tall man in his late 40s named David Mercer, and David's 23-year-old daughter, Emily. David had a weathered face, a sandy mustache, sturdy hiking shoes, and the loose physical confidence of someone who spent most weekends outdoors. Emily had dark curly hair twisted into a messy bun, and an open, expressive face. She crouched as soon as Charlie approached, but waited for him to sniff her hand before touching him. "Oh, Dad," Emily whispered. "Look at that face." Charlie leaned slightly into her fingers. David smiled, then asked Rachel about exercise. He and Emily camped regularly in Shenandoah and wanted a dog that could join them on long trails. Rachel glanced down at Charlie's back legs. "He'll enjoy short walks, maybe a slow mile on a good day. 5 miles to the mountains? Probably not." David looked genuinely disappointed. He was not rejecting Charlie because Charlie was defective. He was admitting that the life he planned to offer was not the life Charlie could comfortably live. Emily stroked Charlie once more before standing. They moved toward another dog. Charlie watched them go. Then he stopped trying. He returned to Rachel, turned carefully in a small circle beside her shoes, and lowered himself onto the floor. His chin settled over his front paws. Around him, conversations continued. A young terrier left with a woman carrying a new red leash. 2 children laughed near the front desk. Someone posed for a photograph beside a newly adopted beagle. From the human side of the room, every refusal had been reasonable. That was what made it difficult. People liked stories where rejection revealed bad character, because then sympathy had somewhere clean to land. But sometimes nobody was cruel. Sometimes a woman's hip could not carry 75 pounds. Sometimes medication exceeded a family's budget. Sometimes a man wanted a hiking companion and an old dog needed a short sidewalk. A responsible no could still hurt the one left behind. Across Norfolk, a man who had never met Charlie was arguing about that exact distinction. Ryan Mitchell was 38 years old and served as a Navy SEAL assigned to a training role in Norfolk. He was just over 6 feet tall, athletic and broad-shouldered, with short, dark brown hair cut close in military fashion, and a clean-shaven, angular face that became stern whenever he believed something had a simple right answer. He had spent much of the morning at a training facility and was still wearing his Navy working uniform Type 3 when he met his mother at a quiet neighborhood cafe. Carol Mitchell, 66, sat opposite him with both hands around a cup of tea. A retired elementary school teacher, Carol had softly curled gray-blonde hair, pale blue eyes, and a warm face that encouraged strangers to tell her their problems in grocery store lines. She had been widowed 6 years earlier, and losing her husband had made her fiercely protective of her independence. She loved her son, but she disliked the way Ryan sometimes confused protecting people with deciding for them. Carol mentioned her friend Nancy, who had recently moved into assisted living after several falls. "Nancy's daughter took Baxter yesterday," Carol said. "Nancy cried half the morning." Ryan frowned. "Her dog?" "Yes." "She should have planned better." Carol looked up slowly. "Planned better for falling?" "For taking responsibility for an animal. Ryan, if you bring a dog into your life, you finish what you started." He did not say it cruelly. Ryan rarely intended cruelty. The problem was that he trusted principles more easily than circumstances. His work had taught him that commitment mattered when conditions became difficult. Somewhere along the way, he had begun applying the same rule to every kind of human failure. Carol stirred her tea once. "You think Nancy stopped loving Baxter?" "No." "Then what exactly are you judging?" Ryan leaned back. "I'm saying responsibility has to mean something. And I'm saying bodies change, houses change, money changes, people get sick." "That sounds like a nicer way of saying they quit." Carol's spoon stopped against the cup. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked directly at her son. "At 66, I know something you don't know yet. Sometimes you can love something with everything you have and still discover your hands aren't strong enough to hold it the same way anymore." Ryan looked toward the rain-damp window instead of answering. He hated arguments with no clean solution. Carol did not rescue him from the silence. Back at Harbor Haven, volunteers began folding unused chairs as the afternoon thinned. Another family left through the front doors with a young dog between them. Charlie remained beside Rachel. A blue paper number slipped from beneath one of the chairs and skittered across the floor in the draft. Charlie rose only enough to reposition himself. One worn front paw landed on the card. Then he slowly lowered his body over it, rested his silver muzzle across his paws, and became still. Rachel glanced at the clock. More than an hour remained before the adoption event ended. Charlie no longer looked toward the people walking past him. Late afternoon pressed a dull silver light against the windows of Harbor Haven Animal Shelter in Norfolk. The earlier rain had stopped, but the parking lot was still wet, reflecting the yellow glow from the building whenever a car passed. Inside, the adoption event was beginning to lose its energy. Half the folding chairs had already been stacked against the wall. Empty coffee cups gathered near the volunteer table, and the excited barking that had filled the room earlier had thinned as more dogs left with their new families. Charlie remained beside Rachel Morgan, his silver muzzle resting across his front paws, one worn paw still close to the blue paper card marked 47. He had not approached another person since David Mercer and Emily had walked away. Rachel had stopped encouraging him. There were moments, she had learned, when asking an animal to try again was less compassionate than simply allowing it to be tired. That was when Kevin Harris noticed him. Kevin was 44, medium height and slightly heavy through the waist, with thinning brown hair combed carefully to one side, a short beard flecked with gray around the chin, and tired green eyes behind rectangular glasses. His clothes were ordinary. A navy windbreaker over a checked shirt, faded jeans, clean sneakers. And there was something recently unsettled about the way he stood, as though he had not yet learned what to do with his hands when no one else occupied his attention. Kevin had been divorced for 8 months after a 15-year marriage. His former wife had kept their small terrier because the dog had always slept beside her, and Kevin had moved into a modest apartment alone. He had not originally planned to adopt that afternoon. He had come because silence inside his apartment had begun to feel less peaceful than empty. Kevin stopped several feet from Charlie instead of walking directly toward him. "He's older, isn't he?" he asked. Rachel nodded. Charlie eventually noticed Kevin and lifted his head. Kevin crouched, but not too close. "I'm not looking for a jogging partner," he said with a small smile. "I'm not much of a jogging partner myself." Charlie watched him for several seconds, then slowly stood and walked close enough to smell Kevin's knuckles. Kevin's expression changed, not dramatically, something simply softened. He scratched carefully beneath Charlie's jaw after Rachel showed him how to stay within the dog's field of vision. "Quiet guy," Kevin murmured. "I could use quiet." Rachel did not let the moment become romantic. She had already watched 3 people discover that affection and suitability were not the same thing. She explained that Charlie was 11, almost completely deaf and arthritic in both rear legs. His medication would be daily, not occasional. His veterinary needs could increase. There might eventually be blood work, imaging, dental care, stronger pain management, or mobility assistance. Kevin listened. He asked how often Charlie needed to walk and whether the deafness caused behavioral problems. Rachel explained that Charlie could startle if approached from behind, but had not shown a history of biting. "He needs predictability," she said, "and somebody who understands that an old dog doesn't become young because he gets adopted." Kevin rubbed the side of his beard and glanced down at Charlie. "That's okay. I don't need him to be anything else." Rachel asked where he lived. "Apartment," Kevin answered. She asked whether animals were allowed. Kevin said yes and even pulled up the lease policy on his phone. Rachel asked whether he had transportation for veterinary appointments. Kevin pointed toward the parking lot. "SUV?" It seemed responsible enough. More importantly, Kevin did not appear swept up in the room's emotions. He spoke quietly, read every page Rachel gave him, and returned twice to the medical section before signing. When the final line received his signature, a young shelter assistant named Lily Grant, 26, with freckled fair skin, dark blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail, and the restless optimism of someone who had only worked in rescue for 9 months, pressed both hands together beneath her chin. "Charlie got one," she whispered. Rachel almost corrected her. She hated the language of winning and losing around adoption, but then she looked at Charlie and allowed herself one tired smile. Lily took a quick photograph for the shelter record, Kevin kneeling beside Charlie, one hand resting lightly against the old shepherd's chest. No one asked Charlie to look at the camera. Minutes later, Rachel clipped on Charlie's leash and walked outside with Kevin. The rain-cooled air made Charlie lift his nose. Kevin's dark gray SUV sat 3 rows away. He opened the rear passenger door, revealing a seat far higher than the floors Charlie had been crossing all afternoon. Kevin patted the edge. Charlie stared at it. "Come on, buddy." Charlie could not hear him. Kevin remembered and stepped around until Charlie could see his face, then gestured toward the seat. Charlie lifted one front paw onto the doorframe, tried to push upward, and immediately dropped back down when his rear legs failed to follow. His claws scraped the wet pavement. Kevin's face tightened. "It's okay," he said, more to himself than Charlie. Rachel told him not to force it. Lily hurried back inside and returned with a folding aluminium ramp used for senior dogs. Together they positioned it against the vehicle. Charlie sniffed the surface but did not climb. Kevin watched the old dog's hips sway when he turned away, and something in his expression began to change. Rachel recognized it before he said anything. It was not disgust. It was calculation arriving too late. "How much worse does that get?" Kevin asked quietly. Rachel did not pretend not to understand. "The arthritis?" He nodded. "It varies." "But he's 11. You should assume he may need more help, not less." Kevin stared at the ramp. Then he asked how much Charlie weighed. 76 pounds at his last exam. Kevin took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt, even though they were not wet. My building's elevator breaks. Rachel went still. How often? Too often. He gave a nervous laugh that died almost immediately. 3rd floor. Rachel felt disappointment rise in her, hot and unfair. You didn't mention stairs. You asked if the building allowed dogs. I also asked about his mobility. I know. Kevin pressed both palms against the roof of his SUV and looked away. I know. He explained that he had pictured slow walks, medication on the kitchen counter, Charlie sleeping in the living room while he watched television. He had not pictured 76 pounds of frightened dog at the bottom of 3 flights of concrete stairs when the elevator failed. He had not pictured Charlie unable to climb into a vehicle. People often imagined responsibility in scenes they already understood. The dangerous parts were the scenes they had never thought to imagine. For nearly half an hour, Kevin tried to convince himself it could work. He asked about portable harnesses. Rachel explained them. He asked whether one person could use them safely. Sometimes, she said. He asked what happened if Charlie refused stairs altogether. Rachel did not answer immediately. Kevin eventually sat on the curb, elbows on his knees, while Charlie stood beside the ramp looking toward the shelter doors. If I take him anyway because I already signed, Kevin said, am I doing the right thing? Or am I just trying not to look like a jerk? Rachel wished she had a kinder answer. Those aren't always the same thing. Kevin closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked embarrassed, almost sick. I need to cancel it. Lily looked away. Rachel felt anger first. Then training, experience, and 17 years of watching good intentions collide with reality pushed through it. Taking Charlie into an unsuitable home merely to preserve Kevin's pride would not make the signature more honorable. Rachel led Charlie back inside. He went willingly. That hurt in a different way. Lily remained near the front desk after Kevin left, staring at the photograph she had taken less than an hour earlier. She deleted the celebratory caption she had started and instead posted a quieter image of Charlie lying near the stacked chairs. She wrote only, Charlie, 11, death, senior shepherd, still waiting tonight. The post moved through a local community page and eventually appeared on the phone of Matt Collins during a break at a Navy training facility several miles away. Matt was 34, a lean, long-armed Navy SEAL with close-cropped sandy hair, a crooked nose from a training accident years earlier, and the habit of masking concern with jokes until humor was no longer useful. He had worked beside Ryan Mitchell long enough to know exactly which stories would irritate him. Matt read the comments beneath Charlie's photograph, saw that an adoption had been started and then canceled, and sent the link to Ryan with a short message. This old guy had a brutal day. Ryan was sitting at a metal table, still irritated from his lunch conversation with Carol, when the message arrived. He opened it. He read Charlie's age, death, arthritis, 4 previous adoption events. Then he reached the update explaining that someone had agreed to take Charlie and backed out before leaving. Ryan's jaw tightened. Unbelievable, he muttered. Matt glanced over. What? Ryan turned the phone toward him. Guy adopted an 11-year-old dog and returned him before he even left. Matt read it again. Maybe something happened. Something always happens. You don't know the guy. He signed. Matt leaned against the table. That isn't the same as knowing the situation. Ryan did not answer. He had no idea Kevin lived on the 3rd floor. He did not know about the failing elevator, Charlie's weight, or the ramp in the rain. None of that existed in Ryan's mind. There was only a promise made and withdrawn, and that was enough for him to build a judgment around a stranger. Ryan checked the shelter's number. Then he looked at the time and called. Rachel answered while standing among half-packed boxes and stacked chairs. Harbor Haven. Ryan introduced himself and asked about Charlie. Rachel said the shelter would close in 20 minutes. I'm about 25, maybe 30 minutes away. Then come tomorrow, Rachel said. He'll be here in the morning. Ryan was silent. Across the room, Charlie had returned to the same section of floor near the wall and lowered himself between two stacks of folded chairs. The blue number 47 remained nearby, bent at one corner. Ryan finally asked, "Is the dog still there?" Rachel looked at Charlie. "Yes," she said, "he's still here." Ryan ended the call, stood, and reached for his keys. Matt watched him from across the room but did not ask where he was going. Ryan was already walking toward the door. Evening had settled over Norfolk by the time Ryan Mitchell turned into the Harbor Haven parking lot. The rain was gone, but the pavement still held a dark shine beneath the lamps, and a cool wind moved scraps of damp leaves along the curb. Most of the cars were already gone. The shelter's front windows glowed against the dim street, though half the lights inside had been switched off. Ryan parked near the entrance, killed the engine and sat for a few seconds with both hands on the steering wheel. He had driven quickly enough to arrive after closing anyway. He was still wearing his Navy working uniform Type 3 from the training facility, the green-gray-brown camouflage creased at the elbows from the day's work. At 38, Ryan had the compact strength of a man who had spent most of his adult life treating physical readiness as an obligation rather than a hobby. His dark brown hair was cut close, his clean-shaven jaw looked sharper beneath the parking lot lights, and his broad shoulders made the uniform seem almost too orderly for the quiet building in front of him. He had come straight from the base because waiting until morning had felt wrong. That alone should have told him something. Ryan was accustomed to problems that became worse when people delayed. A bad decision made early could still be corrected. A missed opportunity could cost someone more than comfort. Those instincts had served him well in the Navy. They were less reliable in ordinary life, where urgency often belonged more to the person feeling it than to the person supposedly being helped. Ryan tried the front door. Locked. A few seconds later, Rachel Morgan appeared from the hallway and opened it just wide enough to look at him. "You're the one who called?" "Ryan Mitchell?" Her hazel eyes traveled briefly over his uniform, then returned to his face. She looked tired. More gray showed in her dark hair under the fluorescent light than Ryan remembered from the shelter photo online. "We're closed." "I know. You said you were 30 minutes away." "I was." Rachel glanced at the clock behind the reception desk, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. Ryan entered. The building felt entirely different without the adoption crowd. No children rushed toward kennels. No volunteers called numbers. No cheerful voices tried to persuade nervous animals that everything was fine. There was only the distant hum of ventilation, the occasional metallic clink from somewhere in the kennel wing, and the faint smell of disinfectant layered over wet dog. Lily Grant was carrying a stack of folded blankets toward the back. She gave Ryan a curious glance but continued walking. Rachel had apparently told the remaining staff that the day was over, and she seemed determined not to let one uniformed stranger restart it. Charlie was still in the multi-purpose room. Most of the folding chairs had been stacked against the far wall. A few remained scattered near the center. Charlie lay beside one of them, his black and tan body curved awkwardly to spare his stiff rear legs. His silver muzzle rested on his front paws. His eyes were open. Ryan stopped. The photograph Matt had sent had made Charlie look tired. In person, age was more complicated than that. Charlie was still unmistakably a German shepherd. Large chest, intelligent dark eyes, heavy black saddle across his back. But time had softened the authority of the breed. Gray covered much of his muzzle. His hips looked narrow beneath the coat. When he raised his head, he did it slowly, without surprise. Ryan walked closer. "Charlie?" No response. Rachel said, "He can't hear you." Ryan looked back at her. Right. It embarrassed him that he had forgotten within the first 10 seconds. He moved into Charlie's field of vision and lowered himself onto a wooden chair several feet away. Charlie watched him. Ryan leaned forward and extended one hand, palm loose, fingers relaxed. Charlie looked at the hand, then at Ryan's face, then lowered his head again. Ryan waited. Nothing. He shifted slightly forward. Rachel spoke from behind him. "Don't!" "I'm not touching him. You're trying to make something happen." Ryan straightened. "I drove here to adopt him. That's exactly what Kevin said." Ryan turned. The name irritated him immediately. "I'm not Kevin. No. You're a man I met 90 seconds ago who wants to take home an 11-year-old deaf shepherd because he read a post on his phone." "I know what I'm doing." Rachel's expression barely changed. "With dogs?" Ryan did not answer. She pulled another chair away from the wall and sat down, leaving space between herself and Charlie. "He needs daily medication. He startles if approached from behind. He may need help getting into a vehicle. His arthritis will not improve because someone loves him enough." I read the post. The post was 6 sentences. "I can handle an old dog." Rachel leaned back and crossed her arms. "Why do you want this old dog?" Ryan looked at Charlie. "Because what happened today was wrong." "What part?" "He got rejected 3 times. Those people had reasons. Then someone signed for him and brought him back. He never left the parking lot. That makes it better?" "No." Rachel's voice remained level. "It makes it accurate." Ryan's jaw tightened. "He doesn't deserve that." Rachel studied him for several seconds. "That tells me why you're angry. It doesn't tell me why you want to live with this dog." Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. He could have said responsibility. He could have said commitment. He could have repeated everything he had told Carol at lunch. But sitting across from Charlie made those words suddenly sound like arguments Ryan was having with other people, not reasons connected to the dog in front of him. Rachel stood. "You want to help him?" "Yes." "Then sit there." Ryan frowned. "For how long?" "Until you stop trying to get something from him." She gathered a stack of paperwork from a nearby table. "No treats, don't call him, don't reach for him again. If he wants to move closer, he will. If he doesn't, that's information too." Ryan almost laughed from frustration. "You want me to do nothing? For tonight? That might be useful." Rachel walked toward the reception area. Ryan remained in the chair. 10 minutes passed. Charlie did not move. Ryan became aware of how rarely he actually sat without a purpose. Even rest in the military had a reason: recovery, readiness, waiting for instruction, observation. There was always a next task. Charlie seemed entirely unimpressed by Ryan's inability to be idle. 20 minutes passed. Charlie changed position once, groaning softly as he stretched one rear leg. Ryan's phone vibrated. Carol. He considered ignoring it, then answered. "Hi. Where are you?" "At the shelter." A pause. Of course, she remembered the argument at lunch. "The dog from that post?" "Yes." "You went there?" "I'm sitting with him." "Are you bringing him home?" "That was the plan." Carol exhaled slowly. "Ryan." He stared across the room at Charlie. "What?" "You were angry when you left lunch. This has nothing to do with lunch. It has everything to do with lunch." Ryan lowered his voice. "Mom, someone agreed to take this dog and then backed out." "And you decided you're better than that person?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Ryan rubbed a hand across his forehead. Carol continued, gentler now. "Don't bring an 11-year-old animal into your house because you want to win an argument with people who aren't even in the room. I'm not trying to win anything. Then why does it matter so much that someone else failed?" Ryan looked at Charlie again. That question landed closer than he wanted. "I'll call you later." Carol did not push. "All right." He ended the call. 40 minutes had passed. Charlie lifted his head and looked toward Ryan. For a moment, Ryan thought he might stand. Charlie did not. He simply watched him, then rested his muzzle back on his paws. Strangely, Ryan felt less disappointed than he would have half an hour earlier. Rachel returned carrying a folder. "You can fill out an application if you want." Ryan took the folder. "Can I take him tonight?" "No, I thought that was the point. The point is finding out whether you still want him when you've had time to think." Ryan looked down at the paperwork. Rachel continued. "Kevin wanted him too." "For almost an hour he wanted him very much." Wanting something in a room like this is easy. Ryan looked at Charlie. What happens if someone else comes tomorrow morning? Then we evaluate them too. He disliked that answer, not because it was unfair, because some part of him had already begun thinking of Charlie as his chance to correct what everyone else had done. That realization embarrassed him. Ryan set the application down without filling it out. Rachel raised an eyebrow. I'll come back tomorrow. You don't have to. I know. That was the first statement Ryan made that evening that Rachel seemed to believe completely. He stood. Charlie watched but did not rise. Ryan did not reach toward him again. He walked toward the door, passing one of the last wooden chairs left in the room. Something blue showed beneath one leg. Ryan bent down and pulled out a creased paper number. He turned it over once in his fingers. Does this belong to somebody? Rachel glanced over. Probably from the event. Throw it away if you want. Ryan looked at the number again. For no particular reason he could explain, he slipped it into the chest pocket of his uniform. Then he left. Charlie stayed where he was. And for the first time that evening, Ryan understood that arriving late did not automatically make him the person Charlie had been waiting for. The night after Ryan left Harbor Haven, Chesapeake was quiet beneath a clearing autumn sky. Rainwater still shone in the seams of the pavement, but the clouds had broken enough for a cold moon to appear above the roofs. Ryan reached his small brick house well after dinner, changed out of his Navy working uniform Type 3, and stood in the kitchen with the refrigerator door open without actually seeing anything inside. The blue paper card marked 47 was still in the pocket of his uniform upstairs. He had not adopted Charlie. He had not promised Rachel anything. He could go to bed, wake up, report for work, and let the entire episode become one more story somebody had sent him on a phone. For nearly 10 minutes, that possibility felt reasonable. Then Ryan closed the refrigerator and opened his laptop. He did not search for reasons to feel sorry for an old dog. He searched for practical problems. Deaf senior German Shepherd care, arthritis management, non-slip flooring, mobility ramps, medication schedules. How to approach a deaf dog without startling him. Ryan read until sympathy became numbers, routines, limitations, and responsibilities. Some recommendations seemed simple. Make sure Charlie saw him before physical contact. Use visual signals instead of verbal commands. Provide traction on hard floors. Others were less convenient. Senior dogs often needed more frequent veterinary monitoring. Arthritis could progress. Mobility could decline gradually or suddenly. There might be days when Charlie could walk normally and days when getting down 3 porch steps would be difficult. A 76-pound animal could not simply be picked up under one arm and carried outside. That last detail kept Ryan at the kitchen table longer than the others. His house in Chesapeake was modest, a 1-story place with 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors through most of the living area, and a small fenced backyard. The rear door opened onto 3 wooden steps. Ryan found a tape measure in the utility drawer and went outside in socks because he could not be bothered putting shoes back on. He measured the rise of each step, then the width of the doorway. He stood there in the cold looking at numbers written on a notepad and realized how little the photograph online had told him. Charlie was not a moral argument. Charlie was 76 pounds, 2 arthritic hips, almost no hearing, daily medication, an aging bladder, a particular way of experiencing the world, and an unknown amount of time remaining. Ryan went back inside and pulled up his training schedule. His current assignment kept him in the Norfolk area most weeks, but some days started before sunrise. There were occasional overnight exercises. He would need backup care. He checked the cost of Charlie's listed medication, added estimates for veterinary exams and blood work, then doubled the number because he distrusted budgets that depended on nothing going wrong. By 1 a.m, Ryan had stopped thinking about Kevin. That change mattered more than he understood. At 2, he found the blue card in his uniform pocket and set it beside the laptop. 47, bent at one corner. Meaningless, really, just a piece of paper from an adoption event. Ryan considered throwing it away, then left it beside his keys. He slept badly. Morning arrived cool and bright, with thin sunlight stretching across the kitchen floor. Ryan called Harbor Haven shortly after opening. Rachel answered. "It's Ryan Mitchell." "I know." "I'd like to come back." A short pause followed. "All right. No congratulations. No relief." Ryan found himself appreciating that. Before driving to Norfolk, he stopped at a pet supply store. What began as an attempt to buy a food bowl became an embarrassingly large cart. An orthopedic bed, stainless steel bowls with rubber bases, a washable runner for the hallway, joint-friendly treats, a wide harness designed for older dogs, a nightlight. Ryan nearly bought a second bed for the bedroom, then stopped himself. He heard Carol's voice in his head. "You don't even know if the dog likes you." He put the second bed back. At Harbor Haven, Rachel was behind the reception desk with Charlie's folder already nearby. Charlie was not in the multi-purpose room this time. He was resting in a quieter side enclosure where morning light fell across his coat. When Ryan stepped into view, Charlie raised his head. No tail wag, no sudden recognition Ryan could identify, just observation. Ryan did not reach toward him. "Morning," he said automatically, then almost smiled at himself. Charlie could not hear him, but Ryan decided speaking was harmless as long as he did not mistake speech for communication. Rachel led Ryan into a small consultation room. "I want the whole file," Ryan said. "You read the summary yesterday. I want everything." Rachel studied him, then slid the folder across the table. There were vaccination records, blood work, weight history, notes on hearing loss, dental observations, and several pages about mobility. Ryan read slowly. He asked how long Charlie had been using anti-inflammatory medication. He asked whether the dose was expected to increase. He asked what signs meant the medication might be causing side effects. He asked how often Charlie should be reassessed. Rachel answered without sugarcoating anything. "His hearing isn't coming back." Ryan nodded. "The arthritis will progress. We can manage pain. We can make movement easier. We cannot make him 8 again." "I understand. You may eventually need a ramp for the house and the vehicle. I measured my back steps last night." That earned the first visible reaction from Rachel, one raised eyebrow. She continued, "And nobody here can tell you how much time he has. He could do well for several years. Something could change sooner. Senior dogs don't sign contracts with us." Ryan looked down at Charlie's age on the form, 11. The number felt different today. Yesterday it had seemed like evidence of how badly people had treated him. Today it looked more like what it actually was. Information. "What happens if I decide I can't handle it?" Ryan asked. Rachel did not flinch. "You call us before it becomes a crisis." Ryan appreciated the answer even though he hated the question. He signed, not quickly. Rachel watched him initial each page, including the sections describing ongoing care and the shelter's return policy. No one took a celebratory photograph this time. Ryan was grateful for that, too. Charlie's departure was almost boring, and maybe boring was safer. A staff member brought Charlie's leash and medication. Ryan positioned himself where Charlie could see him before clipping on the lead. Outside, Charlie paused at the vehicle. Ryan had brought an old rubber-backed mat from home and laid it across the rear floorboard. His SUV sat lower than Kevin's, but Charlie still hesitated. Ryan waited. Charlie sniffed the doorframe, shifted his weight forward, then tried once. His rear legs slipped slightly. Ryan resisted the instinct to grab him immediately. With Rachel guiding from behind using a support sling, Charlie made it inside. No applause, no heroic music, just an old dog breathing harder than he should after climbing into a vehicle. Carol was waiting at Ryan's house when they arrived. She wore jeans, a cream sweater, and gardening shoes, her gray-blonde hair pinned loosely away from her face. She had brought 3 long non-slip runners from her own hallway. "You bought too much," she said after seeing the bags in Ryan's kitchen. "I bought what he needs." Carol lifted the orthopedic bed's price tag. "He needs a mattress with memory foam?" "It supports his joints. He has more expensive bedding than I do. Ryan ignored that. Together they moved a slick area rug that bunched underfoot and placed runners along the hallway between the living room, kitchen, and back door. Ryan began describing where he planned to put ramps, bowls, medication, backup water, and eventually a motion-activated light system. Carol held up one hand. What? You're building a rehabilitation ward. I'm making the house safe. You're preparing to issue him a clipboard. Ryan exhaled. Mom. Carol's expression softened but did not retreat. I mean it. Don't turn him into your next assignment. He needs structure. He needs a home. Those things aren't opposites. No, but they can become opposites when you forget there's a living creature inside your plan. Ryan started to argue, but Carol continued. You know what getting older teaches you? People start looking at everything you can't do before they notice what you still can. Then they call it helping. Ryan glanced toward Charlie. The old shepherd had ignored the expensive orthopedic bed entirely. He was sniffing the edge of a cheap kitchen mat. Carol followed Ryan's gaze. See? Nobody told him he was supposed to appreciate your shopping. Despite himself, Ryan laughed. Charlie ate only half his dinner that evening. Ryan recorded the amount on his phone. He gave the prescribed medication in food. He walked Charlie slowly around the backyard, making sure to stay where the dog could see him. Charlie explored the fence line without much interest in Ryan. Before bed, Ryan moved the orthopedic mattress beside the sofa. He patted it once, remembered Charlie could not hear the invitation, then gestured toward it. Charlie sniffed the bed, stepped around it, walked to the front door. He turned twice, each rotation slow because of his hips, then lowered himself onto the hardwood floor directly beside the exit. Ryan stood in the dim living room looking at the unused bed. He considered moving Charlie. He did not. Sometime during the night, Ryan fell asleep on the sofa. Morning light woke him. For one disoriented second, he forgot there was a dog in the house. Then he saw Charlie exactly where he had been hours earlier, curled beside the front door. Not beside Ryan. Not on the expensive bed. Beside the easiest way out. Ryan sat up slowly. The realization was not dramatic, but it settled heavily. He had spent the night worrying whether he was prepared to keep Charlie. It had not occurred to him that Charlie might still be preparing to leave. The first week after Charlie came home unfolded beneath a stretch of clear, cold autumn mornings in Chesapeake, with dry leaves gathering against the backyard fence and sunlight reaching the hardwood floors earlier each day. Ryan Mitchell had expected the adjustment to be difficult. What he had not expected was how quickly he would turn difficulty into a schedule. By the third morning, a handwritten routine was taped to the refrigerator. Breakfast at 6:30, medication at 6:45, walk at 7, rest after the walk, water refreshed at noon, evening meal at 5:30, final bathroom break at 9:30. Ryan even marked a preferred sleeping area beside the sofa, with the orthopedic bed Charlie continued to ignore. To Ryan, the schedule was not controlling. It was responsible. Structure had carried him through years of military life. Structure made uncertain things manageable. If equipment was checked at the same time every day, fewer mistakes happened. If people knew where they were supposed to be, fewer things went wrong. Ryan had built much of his adult life around the belief that preparation was a form of respect. Charlie had no interest in the philosophy. At 6:30, Charlie sometimes ate. Sometimes he sniffed the bowl, looked at Ryan, and walked away. At 7, Charlie sometimes wanted to walk. On other mornings, he stood in the doorway with his old rear legs stiff beneath him and refused to move farther than the porch. Ryan would stand outside holding the leash, looking at his watch. "Come on!" Charlie stared past him. Ryan would gesture. Charlie would turn his head. The problem was not defiance in the ordinary sense. Charlie could not hear Ryan's voice, and many of Ryan's hand signals meant nothing to him yet. But frustration did not always wait for logic. One morning, Charlie stopped in the center of the hallway and remained there while Ryan tried to get past with a laundry basket. "Move!" Nothing. Ryan shifted the basket to one arm and pointed toward the living room. Charlie blinked. Ryan pointed again, sharper this time. Charlie lowered his head and stood exactly where he was. Ryan felt irritation rise. "You have the entire house." Charlie did not know he was being criticized. That somehow made Ryan feel more foolish, not less. Eventually, Ryan stepped around him. The hallway incident would have been meaningless by itself. The problem was that dozens of small moments like it began collecting between them. Ryan moved the water bowl because he thought the kitchen corner was safer. Charlie continued walking to the old location and standing there confused. Ryan decided the front hallway was too drafty and repeatedly guided Charlie toward the orthopedic bed. Charlie returned to the door whenever Ryan stopped watching. Ryan bought a raised feeding stand after reading that it might be easier on senior joints, only to discover Charlie disliked the unfamiliar height and ate less. Each decision was reasonable. Together, they began making the house feel strangely narrow. Charlie became more watchful. When Ryan crossed a room quickly, Charlie's eyes followed him. When Ryan reached for the leash, Charlie sometimes stiffened before understanding what was about to happen. His sleep remained shallow. He still preferred locations with a clear view of doorways. Ryan noticed all of it, but interpreted the signs through the framework he understood best. Charlie needed more consistency. So Ryan added more consistency. Carol saw the problem before he did. She came over one afternoon carrying a grocery bag and found Ryan measuring the distance between Charlie's bed and the front door. "What are you doing?" "Moving this farther from the draft." Carol looked at the tape measure in his hand. "He doesn't sleep there." "He will once he adjusts." Carol set the bag down. "You know, there's something impressive about your confidence." Ryan glanced at her. That sounded like an insult. It was wearing a nice hat. He almost smiled. Carol had always been able to irritate him without raising her voice. She reached into the grocery bag to pull out a jar of soup she had made. The lid slipped against her fingers. Carol caught it awkwardly against her chest. Ryan noticed. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You almost dropped it." "I did not drop it." "Your hand bothering you again?" Carol looked at him. That was enough of an answer. For several months she had occasionally complained that jars were harder to open and small keys more difficult to turn on cold mornings. She had never described it as anything serious, and Ryan had not asked much because she disliked medical dramatics. Now he noticed how carefully she flexed her right hand after setting the jar down. 2 days later, Ryan arrived at Carol's house with a bag of purchases. A large, ergonomic jar opener, lever-style door handles, a rubber grip set, and a printed estimate from a local handyman to replace the old round knob on her back door. Carol stood in the kitchen staring at the items. "What is all this?" "Things that'll make life easier." "For whom?" "For you." "I didn't ask you to buy any of it." "You told me your hands hurt." "I told you a pickle jar beat me in combat." "This isn't funny." Carol's face hardened. "That is exactly the problem." Ryan frowned. "What problem?" "You hear one thing is harder for me and suddenly my house becomes one of your projects." "I'm trying to help." "No. You're trying to remove every problem before I decide whether it is a problem." Ryan put both hands on the kitchen counter. "You're 66, Mom. There's nothing wrong with making things easier. And there's nothing wrong with letting me decide what I want made easier. I don't understand why you're fighting me over a door handle, because it isn't about the door handle." Her voice was not loud, but the quietness made Ryan listen. Carol held up her right hand. "Yes, my grip is weaker than it used to be. Yes, some mornings that old back door knob annoys me, but if every time I struggle with something, you come in and redesign my life without asking, eventually I stop being your mother and become a list of things that need fixing." Ryan said nothing. Carol continued. "People think losing independence happens all at once. It usually doesn't. Sometimes it disappears one helpful decision at a time. The sentence followed Ryan home. That evening, Charlie refused to eat at 5:30. Ryan waited 10 minutes, then 15. He moved the bowl closer. Charlie turned away. Ryan moved it back. Charlie looked at him, tired and uncertain. For the first time, Ryan saw how absurd the scene might look from outside. A 38-year-old Navy SEAL trying to negotiate meal timing with an elderly deaf dog who had no idea dinner was officially late. Ryan left the bowl where it was and walked away. 20 minutes later, Charlie ate. Ryan did not record the exact time. It felt almost rebellious. But the more uncomfortable lesson arrived several nights later. Ryan had come home later than expected from training. Charlie was standing in the living room facing the front windows. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. Ryan entered through the kitchen, dropped his keys, removed his boots, and walked toward Charlie from behind. His mind was somewhere else. An equipment review scheduled for morning, a conversation he still needed to have with Carol, the fact that Charlie's medication refill was due Friday. He reached down and placed his hand on Charlie's shoulder. The old shepherd exploded around. Charlie's body twisted faster than Ryan would have believed possible. His jaws snapped shut in the air inches from Ryan's wrist. Ryan jerked backward. Charlie stumbled because his rear legs could not support the sudden movement. For a moment, neither moved. Ryan's heart pounded. Charlie stood rigid, eyes wide, mouth closed now, breathing rapidly. Easy. The word was useless. Charlie could not hear it. Ryan slowly stepped into Charlie's line of sight. The dog's posture softened only slightly. Ryan looked at his own hand. No bite, not even a scrape. Yet anger rose before reason. "What the hell was that?" Charlie stared at him. Ryan immediately hated himself for speaking as though Charlie had chosen the moment. Still, fear had already entered the room. What if next time the teeth connected? What if Carol approached him from behind? What if Charlie became more unpredictable as he aged? Ryan had heard people at the shelter talk about dogs being returned because of behavioral concerns. For the first time, the phrase did not sound like cowardice. It sounded frighteningly reasonable. He gave Charlie space and went into the kitchen. The Harbor Haven folder sat inside a drawer. Ryan took it out. Rachel's phone number was printed on the first page. He stared at it. For several minutes, Ryan experienced something he had judged harshly in others, the desire for an exit. The thought embarrassed him. He imagined Kevin in the parking lot staring at the ramp. He imagined himself calling Rachel and saying the dog had almost bitten him. The wording would even be true. Almost. Ryan turned another page. A behavior note was highlighted near the bottom. Always enter Charlie's field of vision before touching him. Deafness may cause a strong startle response when approached from behind. Ryan read it twice. Then he replayed the moment. Charlie had been facing the window. Ryan had approached silently from behind. Ryan had touched him without warning. Charlie had awakened to a hand appearing on his body from a world that gave him no sound of footsteps. Ryan sat down. The fear did not disappear simply because he understood the cause. Understanding was not magic. But responsibility looked different now. Charlie had not broken a rule. Ryan had forgotten one. In the living room, Charlie had lowered himself beside the wall, still watching the kitchen doorway. Ryan folded the papers and returned them to the drawer. He did not walk over to apologize. An apology made for Ryan's comfort would mean nothing to Charlie. Instead, he stayed where Charlie could see him. After several minutes, Charlie lowered his head onto his paws. The house became quiet again. A key could open a front door. A signature could transfer ownership. Neither one could make a frightened animal believe he belonged there. That part, Ryan was beginning to understand, could not be scheduled. The following weeks brought colder mornings to Chesapeake, with thin frost appearing along the backyard fence and dry leaves collecting beneath the porch steps. Inside Ryan Mitchell's house, the change was quieter. Nothing dramatic happened after the night Charlie nearly caught Ryan's wrist between his teeth. There was no sudden breakthrough, no morning when the old German shepherd woke transformed into an obedient companion. Ryan simply stopped insisting that Charlie learn the house entirely on Ryan's terms. He began with the floor. Before walking toward Charlie from behind, Ryan gave one firm but gentle stomp several feet away. The vibration traveled through the hardwood. Charlie would lift his silver muzzle, find Ryan with his eyes, and only then would Ryan approach. At first, Charlie startled anyway. Later, his head merely turned. Ryan developed a simple flat palm gesture for wait, another for come, and a sweeping motion toward the back door. He learned quickly that adding more signals did not make communication better. Charlie needed repetition, not complexity. Meal times changed too. Ryan stopped treating 6:30 as a commandment. Instead, he flicked the kitchen light off and on twice before placing the bowl down. Charlie eventually began associating the change in light with food. Some mornings he ate immediately, some mornings arthritis made getting up difficult, and breakfast waited. Ryan let it wait. That small act bothered him more than it should have. For most of Ryan's adult life, delay had represented risk. Training had taught him to act before hesitation grew teeth. Charlie was teaching him that some situations became safer precisely because nobody rushed them. The old shepherd noticed the difference in his own quiet ways. He no longer watched Ryan's hands quite as closely. When Ryan crossed the living room, Charlie sometimes left his head on the floor rather than tracking every movement. He began eating, while Ryan remained nearby, instead of waiting until the room was empty. Most importantly, Charlie stopped sleeping directly against the front door. Not far from it, certainly. Trust apparently did not believe in giant leaps. One evening, Ryan found Charlie curled beside a bookshelf, where he could see both the front hallway and the sofa. The distance between them was still several feet, but Ryan recognized what had changed. Charlie had chosen a place from which he could watch Ryan without also needing immediate access to the exit. Ryan said nothing about it. He had learned not to celebrate every inch as though Charlie owed him progress. Carol noticed changes in Ryan as well, though she enjoyed making him work for the compliment. When Ryan visited her house one Saturday, he found her at the kitchen table examining a collection of oddly shaped tools she had ordered for herself. There was a rubber jar opener with a wide grip, a lightweight electric can opener, and a key turner with a thick handle that allowed her to use her whole palm instead of pinching with stiff fingers. Carol held up the key turner. "Look at that! Civilization survives." Ryan picked it up. "Does it work?" "That depends. Are you asking because you're curious, or because you're planning to replace every lock before lunch?" Ryan gave her a flat look. Carol smiled. "I'm learning." "So am I." He noticed the old back doorknob still had not been replaced. "Do you want me to change that?" Carol looked toward it, considering rather than automatically resisting. "Actually, yes, that one can go." Ryan almost reached for his phone to schedule the handyman. Instead, he asked, "Do you want me to do it, or call someone?" Carol's eyebrows rose slightly. "Look at you." "Don't make this weird." "I'd like you to do it." Ryan nodded. "Okay." She pointed toward a loose cabinet hinge. "That one you leave alone." "It's crooked." "I know." "It'll take 5 minutes." "I know." Ryan stared at it. Carol took a slow sip of coffee and watched him suffer. The hinge remained crooked. For a man who could endure hours of physical discomfort without complaint, leaving a loose hinge untouched required a ridiculous amount of discipline. A few days later, Ryan brought Charlie back to Harbor Haven for a scheduled senior dog wellness check and medication review. Charlie handled the ride better than before. Ryan had placed a low, portable step beside the rear door, and after a long inspection, Charlie climbed in with only a supporting hand beneath the harness. At Harbor Haven, Rachel greeted them near reception. "Well," she said, looking Charlie over, "you both survived." "Barely." Rachel's eyes narrowed playfully. "Which one?" Ryan almost answered when a scraping sound came from the supply entrance. A man was maneuvering 3 wooden ramps through the doorway. Ryan recognized him from the shelter paperwork photograph before the man recognized Ryan. Kevin Harris. Kevin wore work jeans dusted with sawdust, a faded brown jacket, and his rectangular glasses. His short beard had grown slightly fuller since adoption day, gray threading the chin. The ramps in his arms were built from plywood and narrow framing boards, each covered with black non-slip material and fitted with raised edges. Charlie looked toward the vibration of the ramp hitting the floor but showed no particular recognition. Kevin did. His eyes moved from Ryan to Charlie, and embarrassment crossed his face. "Hey!" Ryan's response was colder than he intended. "You came back." Kevin glanced toward the ramps. "Apparently." Ryan folded his arms. "Why?" Kevin seemed to understand the question beneath the question. He set the last ramp carefully against the wall. "Because I felt awful." "That doesn't answer it." Rachel looked from one man to the other but did not interfere.
Kevin wiped sawdust from his palms.
"After I left that day, I kept thinking about what happened in the parking lot. I kept thinking if I'd asked better questions before signing, Charlie wouldn't have had to go through that." "You still returned him?" "Yes." Kevin did not defend himself. The lack of argument irritated Ryan almost as much as an excuse would have. "I said yes because I was lonely," Kevin continued, "and because everybody in that room looked relieved when I wanted him. For about 20 minutes, I felt like I was doing something good." He nodded toward Charlie. "Then I saw him trying to get into my SUV and realized I'd never once pictured carrying 76 pounds up 3 flights of stairs." "You could have figured something out." "Maybe." Kevin's voice remained calm. "And maybe the elevator breaks at midnight and he needs to go outside. Maybe his hips get worse and he can't do the stairs at all. Maybe I hurt him trying to carry him. Maybe I hurt myself, and then neither of us gets downstairs." Ryan had no immediate answer. Kevin looked at the ramps. "I should have thought before I signed. That part was on me." He paused. "But keeping Charlie somewhere I couldn't properly care for him, just so I could prove I keep my word? That would have been selfish too." Ryan disliked the sentence, mostly because he could not dismiss it. For weeks he had carried a simple version of Kevin in his head, a man who said yes and then quit. That version had been useful. It made Ryan's own decision feel cleaner. The actual man standing in front of him was inconveniently human. Kevin explained that he worked maintenance for a small apartment complex and had basic carpentry skills. After returning Charlie, he had started building inexpensive rants from leftover materials. Harbor Haven gave them to adopters of senior dogs who needed them. "I can't change what I did," Kevin said. "I can at least make somebody else think about the step before they get to the parking lot." Ryan glanced down at Charlie. The old shepherd was sniffing the corner of one of the ramps. No resentment, no moral judgment. Charlie had no interest in deciding which man deserved forgiveness. Perhaps that was a burden humans invented because ambiguity made them uncomfortable. Ryan looked back at Kevin. "I judged you." Kevin gave a tired half-smile. "You weren't the only one." Ryan was not ready for a full apology, but he said, "I didn't know the situation." "No, you didn't." There was no triumph in Kevin's answer. That made it easier to accept. That evening, Ryan returned home with Charlie after the appointment. Charlie ate while Ryan remained in the kitchen. Later, Ryan sat on the sofa with a book he had barely read for 10 minutes. Charlie entered the room. He stopped, looked at Ryan, then lowered himself onto the rug about a foot from Ryan's boots. Ryan kept reading. 20 minutes passed. Charlie shifted in his sleep. One front paw slid forward until it rested lightly across the toe of Ryan's boot. Ryan looked down. He did not touch Charlie. He did not call his name. He did not turn the moment into evidence that everything was fixed. He simply stayed still. Inside Ryan's wallet, behind his identification, the bent blue card marked 47 remained where he had put it weeks earlier. For the first time, Ryan did not think about Helen, Thomas, Julie, David, Emily, or Kevin. He did not think about everyone who had failed to choose Charlie. He thought only about the old dog who had chosen to sleep 1 foot closer. 7 months after Charlie came home, summer had settled heavily over Chesapeake, Virginia. The kind of humid evening when the air seemed to wait for something to break. By late afternoon, the sky had turned an uneasy gray-green, tree branches bending in long, restless movements as thunder rolled somewhere beyond the neighborhoods. Ryan Mitchell had finished work earlier than expected and was home before the rain began. Charlie, now visibly older around the eyes and hips, had spent most of the afternoon asleep near the living room bookshelf, the place he had slowly claimed because it gave him a clear view of both Ryan and the front hallway. Charlie's routines were no longer military schedules. They had become habits shared between two creatures who had finally stopped trying to train each other. Ryan still flicked the kitchen light twice before meals. Charlie still sometimes ignored him. Ryan still stomped gently on the floor before approaching from behind. Charlie usually lifted his silver muzzle now without startling, and most nights Charlie chose to sleep somewhere Ryan could be seen. It was not obedience. Ryan had come to value it more. Carol arrived shortly before the storm, carrying 2 containers of chicken casserole and complaining that Ryan would otherwise live on grilled meat and whatever came out of a protein shaker. At 66, she still moved with quick independence, though her hands were slower than they had been a year earlier. She had learned to use thicker-handled kitchen tools and a key turner without embarrassment, and Ryan had learned, imperfectly, to wait for her to ask before stepping in. "You brought enough food for 6 people," Ryan said. "I brought enough for you to eat something with a vegetable in it. There are vegetables in the freezer. Those are artifacts." Charlie opened one eye as they passed through the kitchen. Carol smiled at him. "At least one male in this house appreciates me." Charlie could not hear the compliment. Ryan pointed that out. Carol ignored him. The first thunder hit hard enough to vibrate through the windows. Charlie lifted his head. He could not hear the sound, but the vibration traveled through the floor. Ryan noticed immediately. "It's okay." Charlie watched his face. The lights flickered once, then twice. Then the entire house went dark. Carol sighed. "Wonderful." Ryan found 2 flashlights in a drawer while rain struck the roof in sudden sheets. Wind pushed branches against the fence outside. And somewhere down the street a transformer popped with a blue flash that briefly lit the kitchen windows. Carol remembered the casserole still in her car. "I'll get the second bag." "Leave it. It has dessert." "Definitely leave it." She gave him a look and went anyway. Ryan was resetting a battery lantern near the living room when Carol carried the last grocery bag through the back door. Rain blew in behind her. She struggled briefly with the gate while juggling the bag and umbrella, then came inside, wet at the shoulders. "Gate latched?" Ryan asked. "I checked it." He nodded. Neither of them thought about it again. 10 minutes later, Ryan reached for Charlie's leash to take him outside before the storm worsened. Charlie was not beside the bookshelf. Ryan looked toward the kitchen. Empty. "Charlie?" The name left his mouth automatically. Nothing. He checked the bedroom, bathroom, hallway. Then he saw the back door slightly ajar from Carol's last trip. His stomach dropped before he reached the yard. The gate stood open 3 inches. For 1 second, Ryan simply stared at it. Then he ran outside. "Charlie!" The storm swallowed the name. Ryan knew the uselessness of shouting even while he shouted again. Charlie could not hear him from 10 feet away, much less somewhere beyond the fence. Carol appeared behind him under the porch light from Ryan's flashlight. "What happened?" Ryan turned toward the gate. "What did you—" He stopped. Carol's face had gone white. Her wet hands were trembling around the flashlight. "I checked it," she said. "Ryan, I swear I checked it." He could have asked whether she had pushed hard enough. He could have reminded her the latch sometimes stuck. He could have turned fear into blame because anger was easier to hold. 7 months earlier, he probably would have. Instead, Ryan took a breath. "We find him first." Carol nodded too quickly. "I'll take the car." "No. Stay here in case he comes back." "I can help." "You are helping. Keep the porch light on if the power comes back. Call the neighbors." Carol looked like she wanted to argue, then stopped herself. "Go." Within 15 minutes, half the block knew. Ryan's next-door neighbor, Marcus Bell, a 52-year-old high school history teacher with a heavy build, close-cropped black hair, and the calm habit of speaking as if every emergency could be broken into smaller parts took the eastern streets with a flashlight. Across the road, 19-year-old Sophie Allen, a thin college student with red hair tied beneath a rain hood, checked porches and opened garages because she knew Charlie sometimes followed dry spaces during bad weather. Ryan called Rachel. She answered on the second ring. "Charlie's gone." There was no wasted reassurance. "How long?" "Maybe 20 minutes now." "Caller?" "Yes." "Tag current?" "Yes." "I'm coming." Ryan called Kevin next only because Rachel texted him the number and told him another set of eyes would help. Kevin arrived 20 minutes later, in a brown work jacket already soaked through at the shoulders. He did not mention the past. He simply asked, "Where have you checked?" Ryan showed him a map on his phone. Kevin nodded toward the streets near a drainage ditch. "I'll take those." Ryan hesitated. Kevin saw it. "You can dislike me tomorrow." Then he walked into the rain. That sentence stayed with Ryan longer than he wanted. An hour passed, then 2. The storm weakened, but power remained out across several blocks. Every dark shape at the edge of Ryan's flashlight became Charlie for half a second. Every porch, every parked car, every patch of silver catching the beam. Nothing. Fear did strange things to Ryan's mind. He began remembering Charlie at 11 years old instead of 12, Charlie asleep by the door, Charlie nearly catching his wrist, Charlie's paw slipping onto his boot, Charlie refusing the expensive bed. He hated himself for counting time that way, as if memories were evidence that something had already ended. Carol called twice, no Charlie at home. Her voice sounded smaller each time. On the third call she said, "I should have checked the gate twice." Ryan leaned against a wet mailbox. "Mom, I know what I did." "No. You know what happened. That's not the same thing." Carol went quiet. Ryan heard himself and realized how far that sentence stood from the man who had once judged Nancy for giving up her dog when her body could no longer keep up. "Just stay there," he said. "We're still looking." Shortly after the third hour, Sophie called. "There's a woman 6 streets over who says an old shepherd came onto her porch." Ryan was moving before she finished the address. The house belonged to Dorothy Hayes. Dorothy was 80, a small widowed woman with deep brown skin, short white curls, and a narrow face softened by large dark eyes. She had lived in the same blue-sided house for 37 years and had lost her husband Samuel 5 winters earlier. Widowhood had made her comfortable with silence in a way she had never wanted to become. She was stubborn about accepting help, generous with neighborhood children, and famous on the block for leaving bowls of water outside during hot weather for wandering animals. Ryan reached her yard with Rachel and Kevin only seconds behind him. Dorothy was sitting on the covered porch in a wooden chair. Charlie lay beside her feet. For a moment, Ryan could not move. Charlie's black and tan coat was damp along the sides. His silver muzzle rested on his paws. His rear legs were stretched awkwardly behind him. Dorothy looked up. "You looking for this gentleman?" Ryan exhaled something between a laugh and a breath he had been holding for 3 hours. "Yes." Dorothy adjusted the shawl around her shoulders. "He wandered in during the rain. I opened the gate because I thought he looked tired." "You didn't call the number on his tag?" "My glasses are inside." She pointed toward Charlie. "And every time I thought about getting up, he put his head on my slipper." Seemed rude to disturb him. Kevin looked away, smiling. Rachel covered her mouth for a moment. There had been no emergency on this porch, no dramatic rescue, no hero. Only an 80-year-old widow and an elderly deaf dog sitting together in the dark, while other people searched the neighborhood imagining disaster. Ryan stepped through the gate. Charlie saw him, his head lifted, then his chest. Getting upright took effort. After lying still for so long, his back legs had stiffened badly. Charlie pushed once, failed, shifted his front paws, then stood on the second attempt. Ryan did not call. He did not clap. He simply crouched where Charlie saw him. Charlie stared. Then he began walking, slowly. One stiff step, then another. Ryan remained still. Charlie crossed the short distance between them, stopped directly in front of him, and lowered his silver muzzle onto Ryan's bent knee. It was not an accident, not a paw drifting during sleep, not tolerance. Charlie had come to him. Ryan placed both hands against the ground instead of immediately wrapping them around the dog. He let Charlie decide how long the contact lasted. Behind him, Carol arrived at the gate, breathless from the car. She stopped when she saw them. Ryan looked over his shoulder. He did not blame her. He did not say everything was fine. He only looked back at the old dog resting against his knee. For once, silence was enough. Nearly a year after Charlie first came home, autumn returned to Chesapeake with cooler mornings, pale sunlight, and dry leaves gathering along the same backyard fence where summer rain had once left the gate open. Charlie was older now, in ways that could not be disguised. More silver had spread across his muzzle and beneath his eyes. His black and tan coat looked thinner over his hips, and some mornings his rear legs needed several careful seconds before they seemed willing to remember their job. Ryan Mitchell had stopped measuring Charlie's good days by distance. There had been a time when a morning walk meant a complete loop around the neighborhood, because that was the route Ryan had planned. Now they sometimes reached the corner, Charlie paused, looked back toward the house, and Ryan simply turned with him. Nobody failed because the walk ended early. The house had changed in equally quiet ways. The orthopedic bed Ryan once tried so hard to persuade Charlie to use had eventually migrated beside the bookshelf. Charlie used it when he felt like it and ignored it when he did not. More importantly, he no longer slept beside the front door. For months, that had been his chosen position, a place where he could see the exit and leave quickly if something changed. Now Charlie usually slept in the short hallway between the living room and Ryan's bedroom. It was a terrible location for escaping unnoticed. It was, however, the best place from which Charlie could open his eyes and see Ryan moving through the house. Ryan noticed the change but did not name it aloud. He had become careful with certain victories. Once he would have turned every improvement into proof that his plan was working. Now he understood that trust was not a medal someone earned from another living creature. It was simply something that became possible when enough days passed without the floor disappearing beneath you. Ryan was still a Navy SEAL. He had not left the service, refused his career, or reorganized every part of his identity around Charlie. His training assignment in Norfolk remained demanding, and some weeks still began before sunrise. The difference was that Ryan no longer believed responsibility meant doing everything alone. Matt occasionally stopped by when Ryan had an extended training day. Carol could handle Charlie for several hours when she wanted to, though Ryan had finally learned to ask rather than assume. Harbor Haven also had the number of a trusted senior dog sitter Ryan used when necessary. The first time Ryan hired someone else to care for Charlie overnight, he checked his phone 12 times before midnight. The second time, 6. Progress did not always look impressive. Carol had changed too, though she would have objected to anyone describing her as a project of personal growth. At 67 now, she still lived in her own house. She had allowed Ryan to replace the difficult back door knob with a lever handle, but kept the crooked cabinet hinge untouched for months, simply because she enjoyed knowing it irritated him. Her kitchen held the jar opener she had chosen herself, a key turner with a broad grip, and several ordinary objects she still preferred to struggle with rather than replace. Ryan had learned to ask one question before interfering. "Do you want help?" Sometimes Carol said yes, sometimes she said no. The hardest part was discovering that love had to survive both answers. Kevin Harris had become a familiar sight at Harbor Haven on Saturdays. He never tried to turn the afternoon he returned Charlie into a redemption story. He simply showed up in jeans and work boots, usually carrying a tape measure, photographs, or one of the ramps he continued building from affordable materials. When families considered adopting older dogs, Kevin asked questions shelter workers had once been reluctant to emphasize because they feared discouraging people. How many stairs were between the sidewalk and the bedroom? How high was the vehicle? Could the adopter safely assist a 70-pound dog? What happened if arthritis worsened? Had they considered medication, dental care, or emergency transportation? Sometimes those conversations ended with an adoption. Sometimes they ended with someone saying, "I don't think I can do this." Months earlier, Rachel Morgan might have gone home feeling she had failed the dog. Now she often answered, "Thank you for being honest." Harbor Haven had changed its senior adoption days accordingly. Rachel no longer measured success by the number of empty kennels at closing. Families were encouraged to sit longer, ask uncomfortable questions, take medical information home, and return the following day if they were still certain. She had learned something from Kevin's mistake and something from Ryan's hesitation. Urgency could bring a person through the door, but it was rarely enough to keep one there. On a cool Saturday close to the anniversary of Charlie's adoption, Ryan brought him back to Harbor Haven for one of those senior dog events. Charlie moved through the familiar building slowly, pausing at the entrance until Ryan stepped into his line of sight and gave the hand signal they had used hundreds of times. Charlie followed. There was no recognition Ryan could confidently interpret. Charlie did not suddenly remember the room where 3 families had declined him. He did not tremble at old pain or pull Ryan toward some meaningful corner. Those were human habits, turning places into stories and expecting animals to understand the symbolism.
Charlie simply sniffed the floor.
Rachel greeted them with a smile. "He gets grayer every time you bring him in." Ryan looked down at Charlie. "So do you." Rachel pointed toward the door. "You can leave." Kevin was helping a couple examine a portable ramp near the far wall. Lily Grant, now far less likely to celebrate an adoption before the paperwork was dry and the realities discussed, was arranging medical information packets on a table. Charlie eventually settled beneath Ryan's chair while Ryan drank coffee from a paper cup. Across the room, another senior dog waited beside a volunteer. The dog was a 12-year-old beagle mix with a white face, chestnut ears, a round body softened by age, and cloudy eyes that followed every person passing the enclosure. Several visitors stopped. None stayed long, Ryan noticed. A year earlier, the sight would have triggered something immediate in him: anger, urgency, the need to make the room resolve itself before closing. Now he simply watched. While reaching into his wallet to buy another coffee, something slipped free and fluttered onto the floor. Rachel bent and picked it up. The blue paper had faded along the fold. Rachel looked at Ryan, then laughed softly. "You still have this?" Ryan took it from her. For a moment he had forgotten it was there. "I guess." "Why?" Ryan turned the small card over. Charlie was asleep under his chair, silver muzzle across his front paws. "I used to think 47 meant he was almost last." Rachel glanced toward Charlie. "Last?" "Last to get picked. Last one anyone wanted." "And now?" Ryan looked across the room. The old beagle mix was still waiting in the corner. A woman had just crouched beside him, but Ryan could not tell whether she would stay, whether she would come back tomorrow, or whether she would decide the stairs in her house were too much. Ryan did not need to know. "Now I think it just means the right person hadn't arrived yet." Rachel considered that. "Oh, maybe they had," she said, "and they weren't ready yet." Ryan smiled faintly. That too. By the end of the event, the beagle mix was still there. Ryan did not adopt him. He did not whisper to a family that they should reconsider. He did not offer to pay his fees. He did not turn another animal's waiting into a test of his own goodness. He helped Rachel stack folding chairs. Then he took Charlie home. Outside, the late afternoon air had turned cool. Ryan opened the rear door of the SUV. The first day they met, Charlie had needed coaxing, a mat, assistance, and patience simply to enter a vehicle. Even after Ryan adopted him, every trip had once begun with hesitation. Charlie stood beside the open door now and looked at Ryan. Ryan waited. Charlie placed one front paw on the low step Ryan kept there, shifted his weight, climbed slowly into the vehicle, and settled across the rear seat before Ryan had even closed the door. Ryan stood outside for a moment. No one knew whether Charlie had another year, 2, a few months. Ryan had once thought responsibility meant being able to promise the ending. Age had taught both of them something less comfortable. There were endings no one could control. Ryan closed the door. Charlie did not lift his head. The engine had not started yet, but he was already resting. Almost a year earlier, Charlie had slept beside the front door, as though every new home required an escape plan. Now the car door closed behind him, and he remained completely still. He did not know where every road would lead. He only knew which man would be there when the door opened again. And perhaps that was the truest kind of yes either of them had learned to give. Charlie's story reminds us that love is not always proven by how tightly we hold on. Sometimes it is proven by knowing when to wait, when to listen, and when to stop forcing life to look the way we think it should. Ryan believed responsibility meant never stepping back, but Charlie taught him something deeper. Real commitment is not control. It is patience, honesty, and the willingness to keep showing up even when there is no applause. Maybe that is where God's quiet miracles often live. Not always in dramatic rescues, but in changed hearts, second chances, and ordinary people learning to see each other with more mercy. We are quick to judge someone's no, their hesitation, or their mistake because we rarely know the whole story. If Charlie's journey touched you, share this story with someone who may need that reminder today. Tell me in the comments what you believe number 47 came to mean, and subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect your home, and place kindness in your path when you need it most.